My husband had been secretly seeing my best friend. I found out by accident when I discovered his second phone. I said nothing and made one phone call. An hour later, they were both standing at my door. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me when I knew. They expect me to say it was some dramatic moment. A lipstick stain, a mysterious perfume, a late-night text message that I wasn't supposed to see. But the truth is quieter and uglier than that. The truth is that I knew long before I admitted it to myself, because admitting it meant dismantling the entire life I had spent 12 years carefully building. My name is Claire Whitfield, or at least that's who I was for those 12 years. I lived in a 4-bedroom house in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of suburb where the lawns are always trimmed and the neighbors wave from their driveways. I had a husband named Daniel, tall, sandy-haired, the kind of man who coached Little League and remembered the names of every waiter who ever served us. I had a daughter, Lily, who was 9 years old and obsessed with horses. And I had a best friend named Jessica Monroe, who had been in my life since our freshman year of college, who had been my maid of honor, who had held my hand in the delivery room when Daniel was stuck in traffic and couldn't make it in time. That was who we were. That was the picture. For most of those 12 years, it was a good picture. Daniel worked in commercial real estate. I ran a small interior design consultancy from home, enough to keep my mind busy, not enough to take me away from Lily's school plays and soccer games. Jess lived 20 minutes away, divorced for 4 years, no kids. She came for dinner at least twice a month. She and Daniel always got along. They teased each other, argued about sports teams, shared the same taste in terrible action movies. I thought that was normal. I thought that was friendship. The first sign I dismissed was in February. We'd all gone to a birthday party for our mutual friend Karen. Couples and singles mixed together, wine and laughter in someone's renovated kitchen. I watched Daniel laugh at something Jess whispered to him. Nothing unusual, except that when I caught his eye a second later, he looked away too fast. It was half a second. I filed it under. You are tired. You are overthinking. The second sign was in March. I called Jess on a Tuesday afternoon and she didn't pick up. She called back 2 hours later, slightly breathless, said she had been at the gym. That same evening, Daniel came home 45 minutes late from what he said was a client dinner. I didn't connect those two things. I told myself there was nothing to connect. The third sign I could not explain away. It was a Saturday in April. Daniel was supposedly playing golf with his friend Mark. Lily was at her grandmother's for the weekend. I had the house to myself, a rare and small luxury. And I was doing what any reasonable woman does with a quiet Saturday, reorganizing the home office closet. The closet where Daniel kept his golf bag, his old college boxes, his jumble of charging cables and forgotten electronics. I found it behind a shoebox of his father's old baseball cards. A phone. Not his regular iPhone with the cracked corner that I had been nagging him to replace. A different phone. A Samsung, black, no case, fully charged. I stood there for a long moment holding it. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My heart, however, was doing something very specific, not racing, but sinking. Slowly, deliberately, the way a ship goes down when the damage is already done. The phone was locked, but it buzzed in my hand as I held it. A preview notification appeared on the screen before it locked again. Just a few words. Enough words. Miss you already. Last night was... The message was from a contact saved only as a single letter. J. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I straightened the shoebox. I closed the closet door. I walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and stood at the window looking out at our perfectly trimmed backyard. Jess. Jay. The woman who had caught the bouquet at my wedding. The woman who had sobbed at my vow renewal on our 10th anniversary. The woman who called me her person, her word, not mine, every time life got hard. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I simply stood there and understood with a cold and absolute clarity that my entire life had been built on a stage set, and someone had just knocked over one of the walls. And then I began to think. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to fall apart. I sat on the kitchen floor, not dramatically, not sobbing, just sitting, back against the cabinet, knees pulled up. And I let myself feel the full weight of what I had just found. 12 years. 12 years of holidays and arguments and reconciliations and grocery lists and school meetings and nights when I had stayed up, worried about Daniel's stress at work, rubbing his shoulders and telling him it would be fine. 12 years of trusting Jess with the private architecture of my marriage, my complaints, my fears, my hopes, the things I only said out loud to someone I believed was safe. How long had it been going on? That question kept circling. The J in his phone. Had she always been J? Or was that a recent precaution? I thought about the last year, pulling it apart like a seam. Daniel had been distant since the fall. I had blamed work stress, a difficult quarter, the pressure of Lily starting a new school. Jess had been busy too, canceling dinners, rescheduling calls, always with some reasonable explanation. The gym, a freelance project, a family thing. And I had believed every word because I wanted to, because the alternative was this floor, this silence, this ruin. After an hour, I stood up. Here's what I knew about myself. I was not a woman who acted from emotion if I could help it. I had built a small business from scratch while raising a child and managing a household. I knew how to make decisions under pressure. I knew how to separate what I felt from what I needed to do. And what I needed to do now was not weep and confront and scream into the beautiful suburban air. What I needed to do was think. I made a list, not a dramatic list, just a practical one, the kind I made for client projects. Assets, liabilities, risks, timeline. In Illinois, marriage is an equitable distribution state. 12 years of marriage, 1 child, a jointly owned home, a jointly held investment account, and Daniel's income, which was substantially higher than mine. I knew these things not because I had ever planned for divorce, but because I was the kind of woman who paid attention to the shape of her own life. The house was worth roughly $680,000. We had bought it for $410,000 8 years ago. The mortgage had 11 years left. The investment account held approximately $190,000. I had contributed to it consistently, even in the years when my business earned very little. My consultancy, my name, my clients, my portfolio was entirely mine. I was not helpless. I was not without resources, but I was also not naive. I knew that if I walked up to Daniel tonight and said I found your phone, 2 things would happen. He would deny it and Jess would be warned. They would have time to construct a story, align their versions, delete evidence. I had seen it happen to other women. I was not going to be that woman. I needed a lawyer first. That was the most important thing. Before a single word was said, before any confrontation, before any phone call, I needed someone in my corner who understood what my rights were and how to protect them. Second, I needed documentation. I had the phone's existence, but not its contents. I needed to think carefully about what I could access legally and what I could not. Third, I needed to understand the shape of the betrayal, not for emotional reasons, but for practical ones. If this had been going on for a significant period of time, it affected more than my marriage. It affected every shared dinner, every vacation, every moment Jess had sat across from me and looked me in the eye. I called my lawyer, a woman named Patricia Hale, who I had used for a contract dispute with a client 2 years earlier, and left her a message asking for an urgent appointment. I kept my voice calm and professional. I said it was a family matter. Then I called no one else. That evening, Daniel came home from golf. He kissed me on the cheek. He smelled like grass and fresh air, genuinely, which told me he had actually played golf that afternoon, which told me the meeting with Jess had been earlier, or yesterday, or some other time entirely. He sat at the dinner table and told Lily about a bad shot on the 7th hole, and she laughed at him, and he looked, to all appearances, like a perfectly happy man in a perfectly ordinary life. I passed him the salad. I asked about his game. I smiled at the right moments, and I began to plan. Patricia Hale had an office on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Chicago, with a view of the river and the kind of quiet that only comes from very thick windows and very expensive carpet. I had driven in on a Wednesday morning, told Daniel I had a client meeting, told Lily's school she had a dentist appointment so my mother could pick her up. I had constructed a small, seamless lie, and I felt no guilt about it. That surprised me, the absence of guilt. But then I had spent 12 years being honest. I was simply adjusting to the new terms. Patricia was in her early 60s, silver-haired with reading glasses she pushed up into her hair when she was thinking. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she pushed her glasses back down and looked at me with the calm, unsentimental attention of someone who had heard worse on a Tuesday afternoon. "First question," she said. "Have you confronted either of them?" "No." "Good, don't." She explained my position clearly. Illinois divorce law would consider the length of the marriage, the disparity in income, the presence of a minor child, and the contributions of each spouse, financial and non-financial, to the marital estate. My years of running a household and raising Lily while building my business were contributions. They had value in court. She told me not to move out of the house under any circumstances, not to make any large financial moves, and not to discuss the situation with anyone who might be connected to Daniel or Jess. "What about evidence of the affair?" I asked. She was careful here. Evidence of adultery can be relevant in some circumstances, but Illinois is a no-fault state. What matters more is documentation of marital assets and your role in the household. That said, she paused. If there is evidence that marital funds were used to facilitate the affair, that is directly relevant. Marital funds. I thought about the dinners Daniel had expensed. The weekend in March he said was a work retreat. The hotel points that had appeared and disappeared from our shared travel account. Patricia recommended a private investigator, a woman named Sandra Cole, who worked discreetly and professionally and whose documentation held up in court. I took the card. I drove home feeling something I hadn't expected: steadiness. Meanwhile, something was shifting on the other side. I didn't know it then. I pieced it together later. But Daniel had noticed a change in me during those days. Not a dramatic change. I hadn't become cold or distant. If anything, I had become easier to live with, because I had stopped needing things from him. I had stopped hoping he would reach for my hand or remember to ask about my day. The expectation was gone, and in its absence, I was calm. Too calm, apparently, for a man who had spent years reading my moods. He mentioned it to Jess. I know this because Jess texted me that Thursday. A casual text. "Hey, stranger, haven't heard from you. Coffee this week." The kind of text she had sent me 100 times. But the timing was not casual. The timing was a probe. She was checking to see if I was still standing in the same place I had always stood. I texted back, "Swamped with a project. Soon, miss you." I did not miss her. Sandra Cole began her work the following Monday. She was efficient and thorough, and within 10 days, she had documented 3 meetings between Daniel and Jess, 2 at a hotel in Oak Brook, 1 at Jess's apartment. Time-stamped photographs, logs of his car in her parking lot, receipts from the hotel that, when I cross-referenced them with our credit card statements, matched perfectly with charges Daniel had categorized as client entertainment, marital funds, used to finance his affair with my best friend. Patricia called it clean and clear. But the moment that moved me from suspicion to absolute certainty, the moment that I think of as the real point of no return, happened not through Sandra's photographs, but through an accident. I was at the dry cleaner, picking up Daniel's suits. In the breast pocket of his charcoal blazer, the one he'd worn to what he said was a charity dinner in February, I found a receipt, a restaurant receipt, table for 2, a Saturday night, a restaurant I had never been to with him, in a neighborhood we had no reason to visit. The name on the receipt was not his. He had paid cash, but the restaurant had stapled the reservation slip to the receipt. Monroe, J Party of 2. I stood in the dry cleaner's parking lot holding that small piece of paper. Monroe, J. Not just J anymore. Her full name, in ink, connected to a night he had told me he was traveling for work. I put it in my bag. I got in my car. I drove to pick up Lily from school, and I sat in the carpool line and I waved to the other mothers, and I was absolutely, perfectly composed. The war had been declared. I simply hadn't announced it yet. The one phone call I made, the call from the title, was not to a friend. It was not to my mother. It was not even to Patricia. It was to Daniel. But it was not the call he expected. I made it on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after finding the second phone, 2 weeks after Sandra had finished her documentation, 10 days after Patricia had drafted the preliminary filing. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Whole Foods. Lily was at school. The engine was off. I had the manila folder Patricia had given me on the passenger seat. Copies of everything, organized, dated, annotated. I called Daniel's regular number. He picked up on the second ring, surprised because I almost never called him during work hours. "Hey," he said, "everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "I need you to come home today, by noon. It's important." A pause. "Is it Lily? Is she—" "Lily is fine. Just come home." I hung up. Then I sent Jess a text. 7 words. "Come to my house. Today at noon." She replied in 4 minutes. "Is everything okay?" I didn't answer. What I did not tell either of them was that Patricia would also be present. Not in the house, but parked 1 block away, available by phone in 60 seconds. And that Sandra's full documentation package had already been submitted to Patricia's office and filed as supporting material. And that I had, the previous evening, photographed every room in the house, opened a personal checking account at a different bank, and transferred into it exactly half of the liquid funds from our joint savings, which Patricia had confirmed I was legally entitled to do. I was not making a scene. I was executing a plan. They arrived within minutes of each other. I watched through the front window. Daniel pulling into the driveway, Jess's white Audi parking on the street. I saw them look at each other on the front walk. I saw the flicker of alarm pass between them. I opened the door before they could knock. I said, "Come in." We sat in the living room, the same room where Jess had sat for 100 dinners, where we had opened Christmas presents, where Daniel and I had slow danced to a song at 2 a.m. after Lily's first birthday because we were tired and giddy and still very much in love, or so I had believed. I set the folder on the coffee table. "I'm not going to cry," I said. "I'm not going to yell. I want you both to understand what is happening." I walked them through it. The second phone. Sandra's documentation. The hotel receipts matched to our credit card statements. The reservation slip from February. I was calm and sequential, like a project manager walking a client through a proposal. Daniel's face moved through denial, calculation, and then a particular kind of stillness that I recognized as the look of a man realizing he had been outmaneuvered. Jess was the one who got angry first. "Claire, you had us followed." Her voice was high, almost theatrical. "Do you understand how insane that is? Jessica." My voice was very quiet. "There are photographs." That stopped her. What came next was not immediate retreat. It was escalation, of a kind I had anticipated but still had to brace for. Daniel found his footing first. He was, after all, a man who negotiated for a living. He talked about not wanting to destroy the family, about Lily, about how we could handle this privately, about how my actions, his word, had consequences. He talked about my business, which relied on referrals from a community we shared. He implied, carefully, that people could be told things that might affect my reputation. Jess followed his lead, softer, but no less pointed. She spoke about context, about their relationship being something I didn't understand, about how I had been pulling away from Daniel for years. She was reframing the betrayal as my fault. I watched her do it with the detached recognition of someone who has seen that move before in other arenas. I let them finish. Then I said, "Patricia Hale has already been retained. The filing is prepared. What happens next is up to you." They left 35 minutes after they arrived. Daniel's hands, I noticed, were not steady when he picked up his keys. After the door closed, I sat for a long while in the empty living room. Then I called my mother, told her I needed Lily for a few extra days, booked a room at a small inn in Michigan I had always wanted to visit, and drove there alone. I walked along the lake every morning. I slept 9 hours a night. I did not check my phone more than twice a day. I gave myself 3 days to simply be a person before I went back to being a strategist. The inn was called the Blue Heron. It sat on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, a white clapboard building with green shutters and a porch that faced the water. I had seen it in a magazine 3 years ago and thought, someday. Someday had arrived, and it tasted nothing like I had imagined, and yet there was something almost purifying about being in a beautiful place with a shattered life, as if the contrast itself was honest. I walked the beach each morning before anyone else was up. The lake in early May was still cold, the color of old pewter, and the wind off the water was sharp enough to make my eyes water. I let it. Standing at the edge of something vast and indifferent was, it turned out, exactly what I needed. I did not think about Daniel. I did not think about Jess. I thought about Lily, about the school year ending, about the horse camp she had been asking to attend, about the way she still reached for my hand when she was tired. I thought about the guest room in my mother's house where she was sleeping right now, and how she was probably fine, and how children are both more resilient and more perceptive than we give them credit for. I thought about my work, about the Callaway project, which I had put on hold, and the Henderson kitchen renovation, which was already 2 weeks behind. I had not disappeared. I had told my clients I was dealing with a family matter and would be in touch by the end of the week. They had been gracious. People, when treated honestly, often are. On the second afternoon, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened while sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. His tone was different from what I expected. Not combative, but careful, almost gentle. He said he knew he had hurt me. He said he wanted to talk, just the two of them, without lawyers. He said Lily needed both her parents in the same house. He said, and this was the part I noted carefully, that what happened with Jess had been a mistake, that it was over, that it meant nothing. It meant nothing. I saved the voicemail and texted Patricia. He reached out, says it's over with her. What do I need to be aware of? She replied within the hour with 3 points. Do not agree to mediation without legal counsel present. Do not sign anything and treat "it's over" as unverifiable without documentation. Jess also reached out. By text, not call. She was less careful than Daniel. She wrote a long message that I read once and then screenshotted for Patricia's file. In it, she said that what she and Daniel had was real. Then, 2 paragraphs later, she said it had been a momentary lapse. Then she said I had always kept Daniel at arm's length emotionally. Then she asked if we could please talk, woman to woman, because she missed her friend. A lapse, a real relationship. My fault, my friend. 4 contradictory positions in one text message. I did not reply. I drove back to Naperville on Thursday morning. Before I went home, I stopped at the house of a woman named Ruth Castellano, who I had known since Lily was in kindergarten. Ruth was a social worker by profession and the steadiest person I had ever met. She was not in our friend group. She had met Jess exactly once. She was, in every way that mattered, a safe person. I told Ruth everything. She listened the way people trained in active listening do, without audible judgment, without rushing to fill the silences. When I finished, she said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "I need someone who won't take a side because they want to keep both sides. I need someone who is just on mine." She said, "You've got it." We made a practical plan. Ruth would be available by phone. She would come to my house once a week. She would be listed as an emergency contact for Lily's school in addition to my mother, in case things became complicated. She had connections to a family therapist she trusted. Someone Lily could see, should Lily need to process whatever was coming. I also quietly reached out to 2 clients who had become more than clients over the years. Women who had built their own businesses, who knew what it meant to hold something together under pressure. I didn't ask them for anything dramatic. I just stopped pretending everything was fine. And what I found in making that small admission was that I was not as alone as I had feared. The antagonists were watching. They were waiting to see if I would crack. I had no intention of giving them the satisfaction. They came on a Saturday morning in late May, 11 days after I returned from the lake, and they came together. I had known it was possible. I had spoken to Patricia about it. They may try a joint approach, she'd said, coordinated. It will feel like concern, and it will function like pressure. She had told me I did not have to let them in. I decided I would, because I wanted to see it clearly. I wanted to be in the room when they showed me who they had decided to be. The doorbell rang at 10:15. Lily was at my mother's for the weekend. The house was quiet. I had made coffee, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad and my phone. Voice memo app already running, which Patricia had confirmed was legal in Illinois as a single-party consent state. I opened the door. They stood side by side on the porch. Daniel was wearing the blue shirt I had given him for his birthday 3 years ago. I noticed that immediately, and I understood it immediately. A costume choice. Deliberate. Jess had dressed down. No makeup, hair loose. the presentation of a woman who was not trying to impress, which was its own kind of trying. She was holding a paper grocery bag. Through the side, I could see a wine bottle and what looked like pastries from the bakery on Elm Street. The bakery we had gone to together, she and I, for years. She had brought my pastries, my bakery, my rituals, borrowed and weaponized as props. "We just wanted to talk," Daniel said. "No lawyers, just us." I stepped back and let them in. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, and they arranged themselves naturally, which told me they had discussed the positioning. Daniel sat across from me. Jess sat to my left, slightly closer, which placed her in the position of the intimate, the friend, the person who might reach out and touch my arm. I noted it and said nothing. Daniel started. He had clearly prepared. He spoke about Lily first, always a strong opening, always designed to land. He said that Lily was sensitive, that the disruption of the household could have long-term effects, that he had read about children of divorced parents and the statistical outcomes. He was using the vocabulary of concern and the structure of threat simultaneously, and he was very smooth about it. I listened and made small sounds of acknowledgement and did not commit to anything. Then Jess spoke, and here the mask slipped, just slightly, just enough. She said that she and Daniel had talked, and that they believed the best path for everyone, for Lily, for me, for all of us, was for the divorce filing to be suspended while we worked on healing as a unit. She said she was prepared to step back from the situation for a period if that would help. She said she cared about me, that our friendship was the most important thing to her, and that she knew she had made mistakes, but that the worst outcome for everyone would be a public, adversarial, legal process. She said, "Think about what this does to your reputation, Claire. People in this town know us. They know all of us. A messy divorce, the things that come out." There it was. Not a peace offering, a warning. I looked at Jess for a long moment. I thought about 18 years of friendship, the college apartment we had shared for 1 year, the phone call she had made to me at midnight the night her mother died, every birthday and every crisis. I let myself feel the full grief of it for exactly 3 seconds. Then I said, "Are you threatening me?" The word landed like a stone in still water. Jess pulled back. "I'm not. That's not what. Because what I heard," I said, "is that if I continue with the divorce, you will say things about me, in this community, to people we both know." Daniel put his hand flat on the table. "Claire, that's not what she's saying. You're being. I have it recorded," I said, quietly, evenly. Silence. Illinois is a one-party consent state. I want you both to know that this conversation has been recorded from the beginning and that this recording will be included in Patricia Hale's file. Jess stood up so fast her chair scraped the tile. Her composure evaporated in seconds. The loose hair, the no makeup, the warm pastries from my favorite bakery, all of it gone, replaced by a white-faced fury that I had never seen on her before and suspected had always been there, waiting. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said. "I think I do," I said. They left. The paper bag with the wine and the pastries sat on my kitchen table. I stood at the window and watched Daniel's car pull out of the driveway and Jess's Audi follow it down the street. My heart was beating hard. There was fear in it, real fear, not imagined. These were people who knew me, who knew my life, who had access to a community I depended on. They were capable of causing real damage. I understood that. But underneath the fear was something cleaner and colder and stronger. I was not going to be managed. I was not going to be warned. I was not going to sit at my own kitchen table and be told by the two people who had betrayed me what was best for my reputation. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Perfect." The hearing was scheduled for the second Tuesday of June, a preliminary financial disclosure hearing, procedurally routine, but carrying the full weight of what we had built over 4 months of careful preparation. Patricia had structured our strategy around one central principle. Let the evidence speak first, and let them respond to it. People reveal themselves most completely when they are reacting, not performing. Daniel had retained a lawyer named Graham, Charles Graham, silver-haired, the kind of attorney who wore his confidence like a second suit. I had expected that. Jess had retained her own counsel as well, because Patricia had included her in the filing as a relevant third party in the matter of marital asset misuse. That was the move that had alarmed them most, being made legally visible, not just personally implicated. I dressed carefully that morning. Dark navy. No jewelry except my watch. I had not worn my wedding ring for 3 weeks. The hearing took place in a wood-paneled room in the DuPage County Courthouse. The room smelled of old paper and central air conditioning, the particular institutional smell of a place where consequences are decided. Patricia sat beside me, unhurried, her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair. Across the table sat Daniel and Graham, and beside them, a fact that still had the power to sting even then, Jess, with her own attorney, a younger woman who looked slightly uncomfortable with the configuration she had been handed. I had looked at that younger attorney and felt something unexpected. Pity. She had walked into a case where her client had already lost the moral argument, and all she could do was manage the damage. That was a difficult position. I knew something about difficult positions. We began. Patricia presented the financial documentation first. 12 years of joint tax returns, the investment account records, the mortgage statements, the credit card history. Clean, organized, incontrovertible. Then she moved to the marital fund's misuse documentation, Sandra Cole's invoice for the investigative period, the photographs, the hotel receipts, the credit card charges, and the restaurant receipt with Monroe, J printed clearly at the top. Graham objected to the Sandra Cole documentation. The judge, a woman in her 50s named the Honorable Margaret Voss, listened to the objection, reviewed Patricia's response, and allowed it. Judge Voss had the manner of someone who had seen every variation of this story and was interested only in the facts. I found her deeply reassuring. Then Patricia played the recording. The kitchen table conversation. Jess's voice, steady and controlled at first, saying the words, "a messy divorce," the things that come out. And then, seconds later, Daniel saying, "You're being," and the sound of a chair scraping tile. The room was quiet when it ended. Judge Voss made a note. I watched her hand move across the page, a slow, deliberate motion, and I thought, she heard it. She heard exactly what it was. Graham requested a recess. It was granted. 15 minutes. I sat in the hallway with Patricia. She said nothing. I said nothing. I looked at the water fountain on the wall opposite and thought about the Blue Heron Inn and the cold pewter water and the wind that had made my eyes water and how simple and clean that had felt. I thought about Lily at school right now, probably at lunch, probably talking about Goliath the horse to whoever would listen, completely unaware that her mother was sitting in a courthouse hallway, holding 12 years of her family's life in a manila folder. That thought did not break me. It steadied me. When we returned, the shape of the room had changed. Daniel's stillness, which had served him through the first half of the hearing, was gone. He was leaning toward Graham with a tightness in his jaw that I recognized. It was the look he got when a deal was slipping. Jess was very pale. Her attorney was writing on a legal pad with focused urgency, the pen moving in short, pressured strokes. Graham attempted a reframing. The relationship between Daniel and Jess had begun, he claimed, after a period of significant marital deterioration. He used the phrase emotionally separated, a construction, Patricia had warned me, that required evidence to substantiate. Judge Voss asked for that evidence. Graham did not have it. What he had was Daniel's testimony. And Daniel, under direct questioning from the judge, because Judge Voss was that kind of judge, specific and unsentimental, began to contradict himself. He said the relationship with Jess had begun recently. Patricia pointed to Sandra's photographs from 9 months prior. He revised to, "It developed gradually." The judge asked him to define gradually in the context of hotel receipts beginning in October. He looked at Graham. Graham could not help him. He looked down at the table. He could not give a clean answer. Jess, called to address the marital funds issue, said she had not known the hotel expenses were charged to our joint account. Her own attorney had already reviewed the documentation and knew this was not supportable. The receipts showed charges Daniel had categorized manually in their joint online banking portal. To not know required a willful absence of information that the record did not support. Jess said it twice, as if repetition might make it more credible. It did not. I watched her from across that table, this woman I had known for 18 years, and I thought about all the things I had told her in confidence, all the private geography of my marriage that she had used as a map. I felt grief, briefly and completely, and then I set it aside. There would be time for grief later. This was not the time. The hearing concluded without a final ruling. Preliminary hearings rarely produce one. But what had been established was clear to every person in that room. The evidence was comprehensive. The recording was admissible and damning. The attempt at reputation management in my kitchen had been transformed from a private threat into a court document. The claim of gradual development was undermined by 9 months of dated photographs, and Daniel and Jess, who had come to that table with carefully coordinated positions, had left it having contradicted those positions in front of a judge who was taking notes. Outside the courthouse, in the sharp June sunlight, Patricia looked at me and said, "They'll want to settle." I said, "I know." She said, "The question is what you'll accept." I had been thinking about that question for 4 months. I knew exactly what the answer was. The settlement negotiations took 6 weeks. I want to be honest about that. 6 weeks is not a dramatic, cinematic sweep. It was a long, careful, sometimes tedious process conducted through lawyers in a series of meetings that smelled of conference room coffee and careful language. There were afternoons when I sat across from Graham and felt the particular exhaustion of having to be precise about everything, of having to reduce 12 years of a shared life into columns of figures and legal definitions. It was necessary and it was grueling, and I did it anyway. But at the end of those 6 weeks, I had everything I had identified on that first list I had made on the kitchen floor, and several things I had not known to put on the list at that time. Patricia had been right. They wanted to settle. Graham came to the table first, predictably on Daniel's behalf, with an offer that Patricia described to me as an opening position designed to make the second offer seem reasonable. He proposed a 60-40 split of the marital estate in Daniel's favor, primary custody with Daniel, and a modest support arrangement. Patricia placed his offer in a folder, thanked him for his time, and said we would respond in writing. We responded by countering with a full accounting of Daniel's income over 12 years, my calculated contribution to the household economy, which Patricia's financial expert had assessed at a replacement cost of over $58,000 annually, including childcare, household management, and career interruptions made in support of Daniel's professional advancement, and a parenting plan that established primary residence with me near Lily's current school with a structured visitation schedule for Daniel. On the marital funds, we itemized every hotel charge, every client dinner that Sandra had disproven, every discretionary expense that could be connected to the affair. The total came to just under $23,000 over 14 months. We did not ask for punitive damages. Illinois law does not easily accommodate them in divorce proceedings, but we made clear that this amount would be factored into the asset division. Graham pushed back on the calculation. Patricia put Sandra Cole's logs on the table, item by item, date by date. He stopped pushing back. The house went to me. This was the element Daniel fought hardest. He had loved that house with an uncomplicated affection I had always found slightly bewildering. The lawn, the garage, the particular suburb in which we had built our visible life. He pushed back through Graham twice. Both times, Patricia pointed to the mortgage history. My income had contributed directly to the down payment through my father's inheritance, which Patricia had documented precisely. She had the bank transfer records, the estate paperwork, the timeline. The house was not equally funded. The math held. On the third attempt, Graham did not bring it up again. I thought about what it meant for Daniel to lose that house. Really thought about it. Not with satisfaction, but with clear-eyed understanding. He had built his identity around that lawn, that address, that image of the successful man in the right suburb. Losing it was not just a financial setback, it was a self-concept setback. I had not designed the outcome to wound him in that particular way. It had simply landed where the evidence pointed. Lily would live with me. Daniel would have every other weekend and a rotating holiday schedule. He was not a bad father. I was never going to say he was, and I was never going to use Lily as leverage, because Lily was not a piece in this negotiation. She was a person who needed both of her parents to behave like adults. I had behaved like one. I could only require that of myself. Patricia included language in the parenting plan that required both parties to speak of the other parent respectfully in Lily's presence. Daniel signed it without objection, which was the most decent thing he did in the entire process. The investment account was split equally. The retirement accounts were addressed by a qualified domestic relations order that Patricia's office prepared. My consultancy, my name, my client list, untouched, entirely mine because they had always been. This was the part of the settlement that had required no negotiation at all, because there was nothing to negotiate. I had built it. It was mine. Daniel also agreed, as a condition of the settlement, to a non-disparagement clause. He would not make statements to members of our community that were designed to damage my professional reputation or personal standing. This was the clause I had asked Patricia to include specifically after the kitchen table recording. She had said it might be difficult to enforce. I said I wanted it on paper regardless, because some things matter not because of their enforceability, but because of what signing them requires a person to acknowledge. It was. As for Jess, the civil matter was separate, smaller in scope, but no less significant to me personally. Patricia had pursued a claim for intentional interference with the marital relationship, which Illinois recognized in limited circumstances. It was not a case designed to win a large judgment. It was a case designed to create a record. Jess's attorney negotiated a quiet settlement, a formal written acknowledgement filed privately of her role in the affair, and a commitment to no contact with me, with Lily, or with my professional network. No contact. The woman who had been my maid of honor, who had held my hand in the delivery room, who had called me her person, she was now legally bound to stay out of my life. I sat with that for a long moment in Patricia's office after the document was signed. I expected to feel something large and dark. What I felt instead was a door closing, quietly, firmly, permanently. I did not find this satisfying in the way revenge is supposed to feel satisfying. I found it clean. There is a difference. Revenge is about them. This was about me, about drawing a line around my life and saying, this far, no further. The final papers were signed on a Thursday afternoon in August, a hot, flat Illinois summer day, the kind where the air sits still and heavy and the cicadas are very loud. I signed my name, Claire Whitfield, and then thought for a moment and asked Patricia what the timeline was for a legal name restoration. She smiled. We can file that today if you like. I reclaimed my birth name, Claire Harmon, the name I had arrived in the world with before I had built anything on top of it, before I had trusted the wrong people with the architecture of my life. I drove home, mine, with the windows down and the hot summer air coming through, and I felt something I had almost forgotten was available to me. I felt like myself. The first autumn after the divorce was the most ordinary and most extraordinary season of my life. I repainted the living room. That sounds small. It was not small. It was the first decision I had made about the house that was entirely mine, answered to no one, required no negotiation. I chose a color called warm stone, and I painted it myself over a weekend while Lily was at her father's, and I stood in that room on Sunday evening looking at the walls in the late light and felt something that I can only describe as ownership. Not legal ownership, which I had, but the deeper kind, the kind that lives in your body. I went back to work with a focus I had not had in years. The Henderson renovation, which I had feared losing during the chaos of the spring, turned out to be my best project to date. The clients were patient, the scope had grown, and the coverage it received in a regional design publication brought in 3 new inquiries within 2 weeks of the issue going live. I hired an assistant, part-time, young, efficient, a recent design school graduate named Maya, who made better coffee than I did and had a sharper eye for proportion. Lily adjusted. Children do. When you give them honesty measured to their age and stability, that doesn't waver. I told her simply that her father and I were going to live in different houses and that we both loved her very much, and that would not change. Her therapist, the one Ruth had connected us with, a calm woman named Dr. Ferris, told me that Lily was processing it in a healthy way, that she asked good questions and expressed her feelings clearly, and that she was, at baseline, a resilient child. I already knew that, but it was good to hear from a professional. By November, Lily had started horse camp on Saturdays. She came home smelling like hay and leather and happiness, and she would talk through dinner about a horse named Goliath, who was, in her assessment, the greatest living creature on earth. I would listen and ask questions and feel something so uncomplicated and warm that it took me a moment, the first time, to identify what it was. It was joy, just ordinary, daily joy. I did not seek out information about Daniel or Jess, but living in a town of a certain size, word finds its way to you regardless. Daniel, I learned through mutual acquaintances over the months that followed, had moved into an apartment in the same building where one of his college friends lived. a 2-bedroom near downtown Naperville, which was fine and ordinary, and nothing like the house he had loved and lost. His professional life continued, though 2 clients transferred to other agents in his office. I did not know why, and I did not ask. He was punctual with Lily's pickups. He was civil with me. There was nothing dramatic about his diminishment. It was simply the natural consequence of a man who had built a life on a double foundation, discovering that one side had been removed. And Jess. I had not thought Jess capable of the kind of unraveling she appeared to experience, because I had always known her as someone who landed on her feet. But the civil settlement, the formal acknowledgement that was filed and therefore existed as a record, had a cost I had not fully calculated. Several of her professional contacts — she worked in marketing, client-facing work that depended on trust and reputation — became aware of the situation. Not through me. I had said nothing to anyone I did not have to. But word moves in the channels it finds, and what she had done was not the kind of thing that stays neatly contained. She lost 2 major accounts by January. She moved out of her apartment in March, the one where Sandra Cole had documented Daniel's car in the lot, and into a smaller place in a different suburb. Our mutual friends, the ones who had sat at all the same dinner tables as the 3 of us, sorted themselves over those months in the way people always do. Most of them stepped back from Jess, not dramatically, not cruelly, but with the natural social gravity that pulls people away from someone whose choices have made them uncomfortable. She reached out to me once, in February. A message through email routed to my regular inbox, which meant she had used an old address and that it had been sent carefully, in full knowledge of the no-contact agreement and in technical compliance with it because it was a civil, not criminal, instrument. I read it once. It was long. It contained the word sorry 11 times. It did not contain the word wrong, which I thought was informative. I did not reply. I forwarded it to Patricia. My mother and I grew closer that year than we had been since my 20s. Ruth became one of the steadiest presences in my life. I made new friends, not replacements for old ones, but genuine additions, women who knew me as I was now and not as I had been. A woman named Diane who had rebuilt her architectural practice after a divorce and understood the specific texture of that reconstruction. A neighbor named Beth who made elaborate soups and left them on my porch in autumn and asked nothing in return. I turned 42 in October. I had a small dinner. 8 people, good wine, long conversation, laughter that felt earned. I stood in my kitchen afterward, washing glasses, and looked through the window at the backyard. The leaves were down. The yard was quiet. I thought about the woman who had sat on this floor 2 years ago with her back against this cabinet and her knees pulled up and her life in pieces around her. I wanted to tell her, it gets cleaner than this. It gets lighter. It gets yours. What would you have done in my place? I'd love to know. Leave a comment below. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more of them, and they are all true in the ways that matter. Thank you for listening.